Great. I think we'll be getting started. We're just nearing about 100 participants. I know we have a busy agenda. It's great to see participants from all over, some coming from the Ukraine response and colleagues from other regions. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Lynn Yoshikawa. I'm the head of network development with KELP. And it's a pleasure to have you join us in the conversation today. So today's conversation is really about looking at some of the lessons learned from the Ukraine response, particularly in the first 6 months of the crisis, and looking forward to what we can learn as the response heads to the second year of the crisis, and what we can also learn to inform future responses, particularly as Syria and Turkey have faced a devastating earthquake this week and faced a massive response and recovery in the coming years. Let's start off with some housekeeping today. We have interpretation available in English and Ukrainian, and so please do choose a channel so that you can hear interventions in both languages. And the directions are here. Hopefully we are all professionals at this after some years with Zoom. We're grateful to the German Federal Foreign Office for supporting KELP to organize this event today. This event will be 90 minutes. Please do submit your questions to the Q&A box and not in the chat so that we can keep track of them. You'll note too that your mics are muted. If you'd like to make an intervention, please do let us know. And the event will be recorded, and we will be sharing the recording in the coming days. In case of any hacking, we will manage the situation appropriately. Great. So for today's agenda, we will be starting off with about 20 minutes of presentations. First from Ground Truth Solutions, who'll be presenting about some of the aid recipients' experiences in the cash response. I will then be presenting some of the findings from thematic research undertaken by the Ukraine Learning Group, which KELP facilitated. And then we will turn to a presentation on e-Dopomoga. We'll have a panel discussion for about 35 minutes, followed by a Q&A session and wrap up. And I am pleased to introduce you to our excellent lineup of speakers. Today we have Deputy Minister Konstantin Koshelenko, who is with the Ministry of Social Policy for Digital Transformation. We have Marina Kobzeva, the Senior Program Manager for Ground Truth Solutions. Paul Harvey is a partner with Humanitarian Outcomes and will be facilitating the panel discussion. Yana Bogtuzimska is the Deputy Regional Director with People in Need. We also have Oleksiy Marchenko, who is the head of the youth movement Be Free. And last but not least, we have Quentin Legallo, the regional thematic expert for food security, cash transfers, and basic needs with ECHO. Great. So let's kick it off with a view from aid recipients in Ukraine. So I'll hand it over to Marina for a presentation.
Thank you, Lynn. Hello, everyone. I'm representing the Ground Truth Solutions and the research that we've been undertaking since July last year. So we are normally, as an organization, tracking aid recipients' experiences and not the activities that humanitarians undertake. So we have conducted 2 phases of research. Let's look at the second slide, please. With 2 data collection partners. So we've partnered with Kyiv International Institute of Sociology to conduct a quantitative round of our research. And then we also partnered with Open Space Works Cooperative, who helped us organize 12 focus group discussions, and 26 key informant interviews to understand our findings from the quantitative round a little bit better. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more about our research, which is, by the way, funded by the Disasters Emergency Committee, the consortium of 15 largest INGOs in the United Kingdom. So here you can see the two maps overlaid. The grayscale map speaks to our reach during the quantitative round, where we reached a bit over 2,000 people. And the colored dots speak to the areas where we conducted those key informant interviews and focus group discussions. So as you can see, the quantitative reach is basically all of Ukraine. And when we chose locations for our qualitative round, we tried to select a mix of areas that were previously occupied but were liberated at the time of research, areas close to frontline, and safe areas that had not been occupied and haven't experienced any significant fighting. Thank you. Let's look at the next slide, please. So if we look at our general findings, you would see that we identified out of those people who our data collection partner reached that 17% of people were aid recipients, 13% of people were not, were people in need, but not aid recipients at the time, and 38% were people who still experienced some need, but also were aid recipients. So that helped us understand that 51% of people that we reached still needed assistance. So all the questions that we followed up with were asked only to those who were over 18 years of age, identified that they had a need in the 4 weeks preceding the interview, which were conducted in September past year, and were aid recipients or aid recipients. So as you could see, the breakdown of who was in need and who was the aid recipient can be seen under the pie chart on the left side of the slide. But you can also look at the gender distribution of those people who applied for aid. We see between those people who applied for aid and who received aid, 51% of people applied aid, 49% of people didn't apply for aid but still received it. And out of those who applied, 59% were female. If we looked at the type of needs that people identified they still had outstanding, the most popular type of assistance that was still needed was cash assistance or vouchers. The second most popular was in-kind products, and then winterization support. And many people were still in need of services and housing and accommodation. It was again conducted in September, so winterization support was just now emerging as a concern for population, and now the picture would have probably been very different. Let's look at the next slide, please. So we spoke about different areas of concern for us and for communities in Ukraine, and we identified the following thematic areas. So we looked at the potential access barriers that the communities might experience. So 47% said that they experienced difficulties, and the older the person was, the more likely they were to experience difficulties. According to respondents themselves, older age persons, retired persons were more likely to be seen as vulnerable, and people with disabilities and seriously chronically ill people was second group of most vulnerable people. Let's look at the next slide. As you can see, out of all surveyed older persons, 21% didn't receive any aid, and only 27% of them received cash and voucher assistance, compared to the overall 38% of the total surveyed population. Let's look at the next slide. In terms of communication channels, most people did not feel informed by aid actors, by humanitarian actors, and they didn't know about services available to them because, first of all, they experienced an overload of information and people didn't know how exactly to navigate it. And also they had access barriers in terms of accessing information that was only provided through digital channels. That was particularly true for people who were older and for those who were in the areas without reliable electricity and internet connection. We also found out that 3/4 of those people we spoke with did not know how to provide feedback to aid organizations, mostly because they didn't know how to do that. They had a sense that the feedback channels they did know about did not work very well. And the usual suspect also that people didn't feel safe doing it. They were afraid of repercussions and that aid would have been seized had they complained or made any comments about it. Let's look at the next slide. So in terms of participation, half of the people we spoke with expected to be able to influence the aid programs design, and only 30% of them felt that they actually could influence, they and the people in their communities. 3/4 of people expected to be asked about their needs, and only 43% said that they actually were asked about what their needs were before aid was provided to them. In terms of participation of communities, especially those who are stigmatized, for example, Roma, third country nationals, etc., what worked best was to work through the smaller national organizations, civil society organizations, or smaller organizations providing aid. Let's look at the next slide. We heard a lot in the qualitative part of our research that coordination with local aid providers was not done to a sufficient degree, and that would have changed a lot had it been done a little bit better. So we heard from local entities that they do indeed lack resources and infrastructure to take a stronger position, but it's not capacity building that they were asking. It was mostly operational support that they were after, so they did experience challenges with human resources, financial resources, so operational support is something that came out strongly from our conversations with them. Civil society organizations and local aid providers emphasized that there was need for more flexibility and better collaboration with larger international NGOs, and local organizations felt left behind, excluded from certain coordination mechanisms, and also limited and inhibited by excessive due diligence requirements of the larger NGOs that were funding their work. And maybe we could look at the last slide. Yeah, so we spoke to communities, we spoke to big NGOs, INGOs, and local aid providers, and we found that there were a few recommendations that we put together based on our conversations. So information should be distributed via more accessible channels, especially to older persons. They particularly trust newspapers, for example, and tailored face-to-face information channels like help desks. In terms of access, there is a need to focus on accessibility and increased access for vulnerable groups. Especially the help of local agencies has to be enlisted to help identify those most in need. And there has to be a flexibility in terms of what targeting criteria should be, because we have found that there are a lot of new vulnerable groups that are emerging that are normally missed by the targeting criteria of bigger NGOs. As to feedback, the communities are hoping to see more inclusive feedback mechanisms, multiple channels that they could use to provide feedback, channels of their use ideally, but at least two, one of them being ideally face-to-face, help desk-like feedback channels, and also ongoing sensitization of communities is necessary to make sure that they know they have the right to provide feedback. And yeah, in terms of participation, international actors and national NGOs agreed that it is achieved in a more effective way if local actors are involved in engaging with communities, as they know better how to ensure that everyone in the community has a chance to have their say in a genuine and not tokenistic way. So I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Marina. Really, really informative and interesting findings. You'll see there are quite a few questions already in the Q&A box if you're able to answer them in the meantime.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's just a little slide of what we were going to do. There are a few activities that we're working on, but yeah, you'll hear from us, but we're not stopping here, and we're also engaging in a new round of cash and voucher assistance research, actually from last month. So hoping to make an appearance in one of these events later on. And I also have two colleagues here joining, Rike and Eva from GTS. So I hope they'll be able to help me answer the questions. And thank you for your questions, by the way.
Great. We'll now turn over to a presentation from on the Ukraine Learning Group research that was undertaken last year. And just for background, the Ukraine Learning Group was established in April last year. At the time, it was connected to the Cash Working Group as well. And interagency actors came together. And the objective was really to strengthen the ongoing cash response through the analysis of existing learning from other crises, and also look at how lessons from the ongoing response could inform other responses going forward. In the July, late summer and early fall, we conducted data collection. Our research team interviewed 33 key informant 33 key informant interviews from across a variety of organizations. There were limitations in terms of the ability to reach local actors as well as government for the research. And so that's why we're grateful to have them in the conversation today. We also undertook 2 workshops with the learning group to explore the findings and some of the next steps. And then towards the end of the year, we worked to finalize those papers. So as has been mentioned also in the chat, the context has been very fluid. So this research really looks at the initial 6 months of the response as well. So looking at what has worked well, really, I think the Ukraine cash response has been really well recognized for the rapid scale. For example, the Cash Working Group reported this week that nearly 6 million people have been reached with nearly $1.2 billion in cash. And it took about a couple months into the response where actors were able to reach 1 million recipients. So it probably is one of the fastest scale ups of cash response that we've seen. This was very much enabled by the digital ecosystem. There were online self-registration tools, and also there was good practice in working with, government lists and transfer values, albeit some of that took time. It also took time for different organizations to establish data sharing agreements with the government. But that is certainly something that should be considered in future crises. The use of the tax ID as the unique identifier also helped lay that foundation. It had already been used before the invasion a year ago, and so there was already that framework, and that also laid the groundwork for the establishment of a deduplication system that was very quickly established. And that was through the building block system. There were also some interesting partnership models that were shared in terms of working with local organizations. For example, some where international actors were really acting much more as the intermediary to facilitate funding to local partners. There was also the use of small grants as well as secondments. Again, but these did face some limitations, and they were relatively small scale, particularly in that initial response. And I think the Ground Truth Solutions research does highlight some of these challenges. Looking at what could have been done differently, as we've outlined in CALP's recent policy papers on what's next for CVA, the existing international humanitarian system has really limited some of the potential of cash, particularly in the support to local actors and systems. There does really need to be a recalibration of incentives. So again, while there was a lot of pressure for a rapid response at scale, there is a need to also incentivize humanitarian organizations to ensure that they're reaching the most vulnerable groups within the affected populations. Again, older people, those with limited digital literacy, as well as people with disabilities. That's certainly highlighted in the Ground Truth Solutions report, as well as some of the, in terms of the reports on the cash response, it showed about 7 to 8% of recipients were people with disabilities, when typically that percentage is higher in an average population. We also think that those systems, those incentives really need to shift to also look at supporting systems and not just scaling direct delivery. It is a big trade-off between sustainability and speed. We also need to look at ensuring more accessible funding streams, especially for local organizations. There are a number of challenges, and I'm sure ECHO colleagues will have something to say about that as well, about making sure that compliance is feasible, as well as making sure that local organizations have an enabling framework for them to register and access international funding, as well as others. And last but not least, the Ukraine crisis. Well, there has been this shift, I think, in the cash community to be thinking and talking about social protection linkages more and more. The Ukraine crisis offered this real opportunity, and looking back with 2020 hindsight, having that kind of early leadership to coordinate approaches to link humanitarian cash and social protection would have been key. We know that there are initiatives that have come online in recent months through a new facility, and I think our speakers will be exploring that a bit more. But having that earlier on would have been helpful. So while there was a social protection task team within the cash working group, there were also limitations in that it didn't involve the right actors around the table, including development actors. Again, our traditional humanitarian structures have limits and have certainly affected the potential of building systems and building on local capacities. So with that, I will just wrap up. I wanted to just have a short intervention. I think a lot of those points have already been highlighted by our colleagues at Ground Truth Solutions. So I'll now hand it over to Deputy Minister Kosciuszko to share a bit about e-Dopomoga. Over to you.
Колеги, вітаю. Дякую за можливість.
Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share the information about how we have been working with providing the humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians. So the e-Dopomoga Gov.ua was created last year. So we wanted to have a single one-stop shop for the citizens, where they can learn about all the possibilities of getting assistance in times of war. And during the year, we actually were extending the functionalities of this portal. So could you please switch to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a very simple website where there are three main areas of assistance, which people may learn more about. So first of all, we have the info page about the assistance to internally displaced people. So this is the assistance provided by the state. We have already more than 4 million people registered here. We have a very convenient registration form, and they can do it regardless of what community they are in right now. So you can use the DIA portal for that purpose. And this page provides all information about how one can get this assistance if they are an IDP. The second button here, this is something we made in March, when humanitarian organizations only started providing assistance. And we realized that it was not only the organizations that can provide assistance, but there are also some, persons, individuals who can provide charitable help. So this is a button which can actually be used to provide assistance, volunteer assistance with food, clothes, anything like that. And people can also request assistance using this button. And there is a simple guide of how to use this from any country of the world. And this third button, it appeared in April last year when the first humanitarian organizations encountered the problem of paying, giving cash to people. We know that there were attempts to give cash at the railway station in Lviv. We know that it was not immediately that this logistics was developed and well understood. And that's why the Ministry of Social Policy, which has all the databases of vulnerable categories of people in Ukraine, we thought we could help with that. So that's why we created this third button. So for international organizations. Next slide, please. So this is what the process of interaction with humanitarian organizations looks like. So I'm talking about the organizations that would like to provide cash assistance to Ukrainians. So this platform contains a kind of an application, and during the 4 months of last year, we collected 10 million of applications. So we will compare this data with the social register. So if a person declares that they are a person with disability, we need to prove it with the database. We'll check it with the database of the ministry. The same goes for people who claim that they have 3 and more children. So we can also check this. And as Dennis Brown mentioned, who is the UN coordinator in Ukraine, so e-Dopomoga was the first UN experience of using a national platform for providing assistance to people in a country. So one of the first programs to join us were the UNFP, and then also People in Need and the Red Cross, National Red Cross organizations of different countries. And we are really grateful to these organizations for their support. So we are not imposing anything on this platform. We're not saying that you should only help these people and not the other people. We are providing a transparent picture for every donor to decide whether you want to help 1 million of vulnerable people in Ukraine. Well, we'll provide you with data. If you want to help 5,000 people in Kherson, or for example, 5,000 elderly people in Kherson, we will provide you with this data. So we are very open to the financial possibilities and the requests of international organizations. And we, on our part, can segment the groups of people depending on what you need. So we will provide the IBAN and other details of our citizens, and using various ways, our partners will transfer money to them. Some use Western Union and MoneyGram. Some use Ukrainian local banks. So there are different ways of how it can be done, and the partners decide themselves. So we are not imposing any financial solutions on them. To join the platform, it's enough to sign a memorandum of understanding with the ministry, and then you will be granted the access. So we have a contact person there working with the donors, answering all their questions, preparing the information, but we will also get the feedback. So all organizations are bureaucratic, so sometimes we get feedback in a month or 2, but nevertheless we show the status on the website. So if their application has been already transferred, an individual can go and see what organization will provide assistance to them, and after they get paid, we also will change the status there. So we don't need to have any contact centers. We don't need to establish separate offices. Well, a person can actually check themselves, but we basically just collect the data and transfer verified information to our partners. So out of 10 million applications we have received, we have already transferred almost 4 million of them to our partners, and about 5 to 10 billion hryvnias have already been received by these people. It's just that we have certain time lag. Sometimes our partners inform us about the payment with certain delay, but we say, according to our estimates, 3 to 4 million people have already received these payments, and this is in between 5 and 10 billion hryvnia. So we work with various organizations like UNICEF, for example, and they also provide technological support to us because we need infrastructure to keep working that when we also need expert support. So that's what they also have been helping us. At the Ministry of Social Policy, we believe that cash assistance is the best assistance. Well, targeted cash assistance, people may then decide what they really need. They will use the money as effectively as they can. And it's not just about support to people, but it's about the support to the whole ecosystem, about the whole supply chain. Well, because that they will go and buy something in a new store, so that's support of the local producers, that's support of the small and medium enterprises, and that's really important because we know the cases of the in-kind humanitarian support, which is also very important, especially in the cities with destroyed infrastructure. But we know that, well, this in-kind in places where the in-kind assistance is provided, business is suffering. Well, while the cash assistance will help both these people and also the small businesses, because, well, these people will buy from local businesses and local producers. So that will provide like the comprehensive assistance. And we can provide comprehensive assistance, like starting from the first step to the last step. We keep developing. I see the representatives of CORE here, so they are working on the well, a special, well, so to say, a personal page for all our well, registered, so that you can go and see well, your settings. You can, well, see what regions are available, what people are available, and then transfer the money. So this is how the e-Dopomoga works in terms of, well, working with international organizations. Next slide, please. As I've already mentioned, well, just some figures. So our main partners are here on screen. So we have more than 10 different memoranda. Some are have already paid a lot. Some are still in the process. The biggest donor is the World Food Program. So they have been working with millions of people and helping millions of people. And they also provide infrastructure support to our platform. And well, working with these partners, we are still open to develop our cooperation with as many international organizations as possible. Well, this is also about the operational efficiency, because you don't have to spend resources on looking for people. You just need to spend, well, your resources on fundraising to help these people. And we will provide you with the technical side of the things and technical support. Next slide, please. And this is the volunteer support, or P2P, person-to-person assistance. This is what I have already mentioned, and what I suggest everyone should use themselves. So that's where Ukrainians may leave the information about what their needs are, and other Ukrainians may leave the information about what they can help with. This is something we did in March, so we tested how it worked. But starting from the beginning, we saw that there are more people in need than those people who can provide with some help. So we thought about the electronic tools, and we thought about these gift certificates, which we used to have in the peace times. So you actually, this is something that you have. So it have a filter. You can choose, well, a region, a social category, and you choose a person, and you just donate to that person. And this person gets a code which they can use in one of the partner stores or partner pharmacies or partner gas stations if they need to evacuate and, well, need fuel for that. And that's how this assistance is provided. And well, the person who donated money, they got well, the receipt immediately, so you can see what was bought using your money, how you managed to help another person. It's all done immediately. It's very convenient. People from 50 countries have already used this service and they keep using that, well, the average receipt is more than $10. But this is the money which helps people to buy food, to buy the things they would need for, well, a week, 2 weeks, or a month. And well, we targeted at Ukrainian and international audience, at volunteers and supporters who act on their own as individuals, but still want to help Ukrainians. Next slide, please. And here we have something about the results. So you see that Ukrainians help Ukrainians the most, I mean, through the platform. So it's, well, because we, well, have a lot of partners in Ukraine, MasterCard, we have also partner stores here. And what concerns the audience abroad and promotion abroad, so it's all word of the mouth. When we go to conferences, we talk about this platform, but we can still see that we have more than 600 people from 50 countries have already helped Ukrainians. Geography is very broad. Well, the minimum donation is $5, and this is a very interesting experience. So I recommend everyone to use it. And we believe that this model can effectively work not only in Ukraine, but in other countries with humanitarian crisis, where the infrastructure keeps working. I mean, infrastructure like the banking system and the retail sector. In that situation, this platform could be very, very useful, because you can join new networks of stores and, well, actually use it in other countries. At the moment, it helps Ukrainians and people from all over the world to join, but we want to develop this platform, and we are interested in spreading it to other countries where the need is. And next slide, please. I think it's the last one. So yes.
And here I would like to express my gratitude for all the assistance which we've been receiving. Of course, this is something which really helps us to be resilient. That is why I'm really grateful for all the representatives of all the international organizations who've been helping us here on the ground in Kyiv, those who are working with us remotely. You help us operationally from Rome, from Delhi, from New York, from very many countries. And it really helps us to make sure that we are united in the struggle on the humanitarian arena, because we understand that our top priority is the protection of the country, weapon supply to protect ourselves from Russia, but our second priority is protection of people who find themselves in very difficult situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister Koshelenko. Really interesting set of presentations as well. And with that, hearing from aid recipients, hearing also about these really amazing and impressive innovations and what's possible in these more digitalized ecosystem, I'll hand it over to Paul Harvey, our illustrious facilitator today, to have a discussion with some of the speakers. Over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you. If the panelists, Konstantin, Alexei, Yana, and Quentin could turn their cameras on, that would be great. I'll start with a sort of few pre-prepared questions, and then we'll open up to sort of answering questions in the Q&A. So do start putting further questions in the Q&A. Coming back to Konstantin, the Deputy Minister. We've heard a bit through the platform about ways in which the government of Ukraine has been sort of collaborating with international organizations. I wonder if you could reflect a bit more about what over the last year has gone well and what hasn't gone so well in the sort of cooperation between international aid agencies and government's work to assist and protect its own citizens, and looking ahead, how best international humanitarian organizations and Ukrainian civil society organizations can add value and complement government efforts. Over to you, Konstantin. If we still have you.
Вибачте, колеги, наскільки я зрозумів, буде наступна презентація.
I just thought that the plan was to have another presentation. That was, I'm very sorry, but I haven't heard the question. So if you have already started working on Q&A, then I will kindly ask you to repeat the question again.
Of course. Apologies for the confusion. I was hoping you could reflect a bit more on what has gone well and what has gone less well, where there have been problems in cooperation between the government and international aid organizations over the last year, and then looking forward, your thoughts on how best international humanitarian organizations and Ukrainian civil society can best sort of support and add value to government-led efforts to assist and protect its own citizens during this time of war.
Дякую, Пол. Питання
Thank
секунд.
you, Paul. I have understood the question. I want to apologize once again for being not attentive enough. This is a critically important question in terms of the interaction with international organizations. I will be very honest with you. We are really grateful for the volume, for the scope of assistance, but our suggestion is that we move forward because there are so many needs Ukrainians have. There are so many people in need because we have managed to find the funding for only some people. We have worked only with some requests of vulnerable people, but not everyone has received. Of course, that some of them receive some support locally, but through our centralized platform, it has not been possible for us to cover all the needs. In terms of this cooperation, of course, that each partners they are focused on us, and we understand that there were specially designated people working under cash and voucher assistance. So we worked on different categories or groups of people, like target groups, and then different organizations. They designated people who were responsible for the technical part of their procedure. Well, some representatives were here in Ukraine. Of course, it is easier if we have, for us, sometimes it is done online. Sometimes we have people who live in different countries. For example, in India, they have an absolutely different time zone. Then there is another question, a linguistic one, because our English is not very good. And sometimes we know that people who represent international organizations, their English sometimes is also not very good. Sometimes they can only work at night, because if you compare it to a Ukrainian time zone, that leads to some frustration actually, but of course we understood that everyone was very open and willing to help. I think it's more about the capacity of my team, because in the Ministry of Social Policy, I have 14 people who work in this IT field, and they have their regular work, they have very many responsibilities, and what they are doing right now, this is something additional, something extra. We have some pen memorandums on payments with different organizations, so it's all about transfers and receiving feedback and many other things. And on my side, in my end, this is only one person who is responsible for all of that, collecting all the requests and having correspondence with more than 10 people. It's complicated. We've been supported by UNICEF because it's important for us to have an additional support office. And we think that in spring, this office will be established. And in that case, we will have more people to our team that will positively impact our interaction. Another positive impact is that we already have partners, and they have not only funds, what they also have is an understanding of infrastructural support. And when in April we spoken to the World Program representative, to David, and he mentioned it to us, it's very important to understand what are the systems which are being used, how do we work, and they shared all the information about servers, about the systems which we use, and they supported our system. It is very critical to us because now we can do it automatically with boards and everything. That means that we have many partners. Chorus International is another one. It seems to me that they joined us in September. They had the idea to create a platform which would be more friendly for international organizations. Do you have a separate place where you can see dashboards and any other types of information? All of that contributes, and thanks to Chorus International, in February, March, we will have a more efficient tool to be offered to our partners, and that means that our partners will continue helping us, but in a more efficient way. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Konstantin. And it would be great to hear more about the UNICEF support and the WFP support and also some more of the sort of problems and challenges. But first, I'm going to turn to some of the other panelists. Alexei, over to you. You, as I understand it, like many Ukrainian organizations, have taken on a lot of new roles and responsibilities in response to the crisis. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the role you see Ukrainian civil society playing in complementing government-led assistance, and ways in which you feel civil society organizations like yours could be better supported to play those roles more effectively. Over to you, Alexei.
Дякую, Пол, щиро за запитання.
Thank you, Paul, for your question. Yes, we represent a Ukrainian organization. It consists of highly enthusiastic people, and I think the same is true for all the Ukrainian organizations which stayed here in Ukraine and they work for the people. Of course, through civil society, we can really have assistance being spread in a fast way, and it is a very good response to a large group of beneficiaries, unlike when we just use the capacity of governmental structures. Even Napoleon, if we take his example, he once said that military forces is not enough to protect the country. When the country is being protected by the people, it becomes invincible. And this is what is happening in Ukraine. All our volunteers, well, people, different organizations, everyone streamlined their efforts to provide help to everyone who's in crisis. We always communicate with our residents, with representatives. We keep sharing feedback, receiving and sharing it with our partners. It's very important for us to engage representatives of local organizations for planning activities and for identifying categories of beneficiaries. That will have a bigger impact because they play such a crucial role when we talk about response. We also see the problem that very often international organizations have very intensive regulations and requests, which would be good for a normal situation, but this is not the case in Ukraine. We have air raid alarms, we have power cuts, we have to go to shelters, and this is something which really makes it difficult for us to operate as in normal life. It's very important in terms of our cooperation, but of course the assistance is of great importance. We are grateful to everyone who've been participating in these processes because we are lucky to hear feedback from the people, and believe me that that was something which saved the lives of very many people, speaking of food supplies and many other types of support. So thank you once again, and let's hope that with concerted effort we'll receive even greater deliverables.
Thank you, Alexei. Quentin, turning to you, and sort of in response to what you've heard from the Deputy Minister and from Alexei, I just wonder if you could give us your thoughts on what you see as where humanitarian funding for cash for basic needs should be focused, both in terms of sort of geographies and in terms of sort of who should be targeted, and where you see international humanitarian actors as adding most value and where they should be most focused.
Thank you, Philip. Humanitarian funding for cash to meet basic needs should be focused on adequacy, coverage, comprehensiveness, and sustainability. So in terms of adequacy, the question is how adequately are the risks covered? The coverage is who is covered. And comprehensiveness is which risks are covered by linking with the social protection scheme. So humanitarian funding for meeting basic needs, should focus on assisting the most vulnerable in need of humanitarian assistance For that, a shared comprehensive analysis of risk and vulnerability is needed to understand who the most vulnerable people are. This analysis needs to be shared by international actors, local actors, and government.
That's great. Thank you, Quentin.
So, yeah, just
no, do continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
So it is, it is critical to establish a clear profiling of the people with humanitarian need, with poverty alleviation needs, and maybe both. So an harmonized targeting is needed from the assistance delivered by the government and with the humanitarian. We must agree on who will assist who. A better understanding of the needs coupled with a strengthened targeting mechanism will help us with, as we have seen at the beginning, with the strong feedback mechanism to improve on the adequacy of the assistance by better understanding. So this is, for example, transfer value of the MPCA, the duration, the frequency. Of course, in the context of constrained humanitarian funding, there is a trade-off between adequacy and coverage, and this trade-off needs to be discussed and agreed between all the relevant stakeholders involved in the response. The coordination and duplication of beneficiary and the broader interoperability of data between the humanitarian cash actor and the government social assistance is critical to maximize adequacy and coverage. Advancing on linking humanitarian cash transfer, so I'm focused, yes, the MPCA, to shock responsive social protection in Ukraine is a key priority. There is a clear international consensus to maximize the use of social protection on social protection system and approaches in fragile and conflict-affected environments. In Ukraine, this topic has been a priority for many of us since the start of the response. It was operationalized in various forms. It has been mentioned a bit before, for example, with some bilateral engagement between organization, agency with the MOSP. At the early stage of the response, the task team 5 that was set up under the cash working group, and so this May, June, and the reactivated social protection working group under the MOSP. This was during the summer. But unfortunately, these various work streams did not produce the expected outcome in moving forward on the linkages between humanitarian cash and social protection. So in December 22, the UN HCRC, key donor supporting MPCA, multi-purpose cash assistance, and the largest implementing agency, agreed that the existing MPCA caseload will eventually need to be phased out as condition allow or absorb into a government program that is aimed at systematically improving longer-term human development outcome rather than the immediate basic. Of course, a residual humanitarian PCA caseload will still be required for addressing strict humanitarian needs. It has been mentioned at the beginning, so the whole issue of the frontline caseload, the marginalized group, the digital excluded, basically, yeah, leaving no one behind as the commitment of our 2013 agenda. So this led not so long ago to the development of the Perechid initiative, so Perechid meaning transition in Ukrainian, which was endorsed by the MOSP. So today, ECHO welcomed this recently launched Perechid initiative, which brings all the relevant stakeholders on linking cash to social protection, humanitarian cash, so the government, the humanitarian development donors, the international financial institution, the UN, the INGOs, international and national. And basically the objective through this initiative is paving the way for the transition or partial absorption of the humanitarian caseload into a more shock responsive social protection system. And the second point is bolstering the national system and supporting the government's agenda to reform the social protection system to make it more adequate, adaptive, and shock responsive to the current context. So this is a bit, Now, where and how I believe that MPCA is required, as I said, for addressing strict humanitarian needs. So frontline caseload, marginalized group, international actor, they can add value on the cash response as of today, on ensuring humanitarian principles are respected, strengthening the coordination between humanitarian actors as well as between humanitarian and government response, and understand the capacity and the gap that the national NGO and the national mechanism, the gap that they have, and to bridge them with the international actors. So the international actors need to partner with local actors, with the frontliners, for example, while transferring the knowledge and the funding in order to build appropriate local humanitarian response capacity. The leadership role in the implementation of the humanitarian response need to transition from an international actor to a national actor, with international actor backstopping the national actor. We have strong system, as we have just seen, and we have been explained. We have to leverage this because it's not sustainable. Financially, this humanitarian response is not sustainable. And so the cash has to be linked with the social protection, ensuring that we are able to have a shock responsive enough system and to gradually transition the humanitarian case load for the MPCA to governmental-led shock responsive system. And so the Perihid initiative offer an opportunity. So this is very welcome.
Thank you. Diana, turning to you, I'll ask you to look sort of back and forward. You know, if you could go back in time to February 2022, what would your organization and the system more generally, what should they have done differently to have a sort of more coordinated complementary response between government, local actors and international aid actors? And looking forward and building on what Quentin's been telling us about the plans for transition, you know, what do you see as what you should have done differently in the past, and what will you try and do differently in the future?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I would like to preface my answer with the fact that PIN has been operational in Ukraine, in the eastern part, even before the February invasion. And this somehow gave us an advantage to be positioned in the country. Still, it is important to know that the mode of operation has significantly shifted after February because our teams were also displaced and our colleagues were among the displaced families. PIN was implementing cash and voucher activities in the east of the country and has experience in the non-governmental controlled areas with cash modalities. But before February 2022, it was not designed as a rapid emergency mechanism, but rather as a complementary attempt to provide MPCA under the social protection schemes. Further, we feel that we had comparative advantage that in the access to different local CSOs and municipalities. And we also had already a strong relationship with the local Ministry of Social Policy. We have never followed the no regrets approach in MPCA. We have followed and applied the scoring and restricted calls for registration all the way. In the East, with the close coordination with the local authorities, that made it possible for us to identify the IDPs and register with authorities and to help them with the registration for assistance. In the West, for us, the key thing to find out was the identification of the messaging, of the right messaging around the calls for registration, for face-to-face registration of the IDPs. For some of the lessons learned from this initial experience, one of them would be the need to invest in technology, investing in different registration and verification methodologies, not only to enable full self-registration methods, but also focusing on programmatic flexibility as a key. Several methods we would like to definitely for the future to be allowed to be flexible and varied from face-to-face through local partners, phone-induced and self-registration. This can all be used as complementary methods. The need to invest in different targeting methodologies to have a flexible targeting, continued blanket targeting to respond timely to the needs of the people, and to respond also to the people who are being on the way evacuated. We learned that we need to be flexible and able to have parallel targeting mechanisms appropriate to each of the contexts, which is what was already mentioned by my colleagues. The next point would be lessons learned on the importance of having diversified financial service providers. We have used the countertop method with Oszczęd Bank, which is the system we're still using. It was at some point good enough, but for the context demands and the multiplication of the FSPs, we started to explore new providers to be able to have appropriate mode of delivery for the different groups that we were serving. So one would be sending assistance through bank transfers, of course, for people who have bank accounts, so that we save time and resources for the conflict-affected populations. And the second one, sending money through the Ukraine postal system, through the Ukra-Poshta, for the people with mobility challenges or without bank accounts. And to further even add on other banks to be able to utilize their networks. For one last point would be PIN, that PIN could improve or enhance the cooperation with local organizations. We were still already an actor cooperating with local organizations prior to escalation in February. But we definitely see an added value, and we have been working closely with local organizations to identify the entry points for cash delivery, especially to target the most vulnerable populations, such as evacuees, disabled populations, and other marginalized groups, as also mentioned in many reports of the cash working group. And also to utilize them for verification, where there are local organizations and especially the local civil society can be the key for verification of the status of the needs and vulnerabilities, as of course the country is very large. For us, for SPIN, it remains to discuss on further exploring on feasibility for cash-based modalities and in NGCA in the annexed territories to assess the level of the needs combined with higher inflation rates, disrupted markets, and lack of public support, and of course the security issues. But this is something for us to continue discussion on within PIN and also within the INGO community. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So the floor is now open for sort of people to put more questions in the Q&A, and there are some there already that we'll start trying to pick up. So panelists do start having a look at the Q&A, and if I don't ask you questions, then you want to answer one, do take that. The last two questions in the Q&A, one is more a comment, talks about avoiding creating duplication and fragmenting even more the linkages of SP space. We have Cash Working Group, TT5, Pericrete, Development Task Force on Social Protection. Is all this very confusing? And another question about, specifically to Quentin, about the role of NGOs under the Pericrete initiative. And I guess sort of also as something of a sort of outside of myself, having looked at the response in Ukraine back in April, May, is it fair to say that the discussions about transitions and coordination between social protection and humanitarian cash have taken longer than they might? Panelists, maybe first to you, Quentin, is one of those questions that's directly addressed to you, but then other panelists do come in on questions of, is it all very confusing? Has it taken longer than it should? And what's the role for NGOs in this planned transition?
Okay, so I start. That's a very complex file. So yes, there are, as I've said, a lot of initiatives that have produced learning and have moved forward the discussion. Nevertheless, the bridging between the humanitarian and the development side, we need to have that done very well. The financial instruments, they have to talk to each other, defining all those issues of targeting, because we cannot use humanitarian funding for poverty alleviation. So the whole issue of being clear with the caseload, etc. So there is quite a lot of work that has been done. Now, all those different initiatives were not necessarily connected. So with this Perihid initiative, it's to bring more capacity in a country to help to develop a shared roadmap, shared implementation framework where all those initiatives will feed into. So it's those, unfortunately, at the beginning, I've seen some comments. Yes, the cash working group did a lot. At the start, there was some very quick bilateral engagements between some agency and government that has helped to move forward. Nevertheless, this whole effort has to be a collective effort. So that's why this Perihid initiative, with bringing more capacity that will play this role in bridging the gap between the development donors, the humanitarian donors, with the government, with the partner, bringing everybody around the table and developing this shared vision. So this is needed. It's now we hope that this will help. We will quickly see. Yes, it took time, but it's a complex one. And so in any case, we have to start and to keep on looking at this and hopefully being able to transition some of the caseloads that we could, with strengthened shock responsive system of the government, could easily be assisted by the government so that the humanitarian focus. And now the role of the local NGO, they have a role that we have now. That's one of the discussion points at the beginning, the parallel system, the lack of leveraging on local capacity. So yeah, we have now to leverage this local capacity because it's strong. It's strong. So it's not usual for the humanitarian community to operate in this kind of a country where you have capacity and you have a strong government with system in place that can assist their population. So now we have to leverage on this one. So there is a role for everybody. Now it's to be able to find what is your added value in the equation. That's it. And we need a chef d'orchestre. So hopefully under the lead of the ministry, this Perihid will streamline the whole discussion and decision-making stakeholders. I don't know if it clarifies or it confuses more.
Alexei, did you want to come in on this set of issues? There's a question in the Q&A about the extent to which Ukrainian NGOs have sort of been involved in these sort of coordination, strategic decision-making around the issues that we're talking about. And I mean, how do you feel this sort of the coordination between humanitarian action and government-led social protection has been happening? Or not if you don't want to, Alexei? I was hoping you might want to come in on the involvement of Ukrainian NGOs in coordination.
Так, дякую за запитання.
Well, thank you for your question. We are the immediate participants of this cash assistance, so almost 50,000 beneficiaries. This is something that we have to accomplish by the end of February. And we have participated in 2 projects connected with cash assistance. So at the moment, the situation is as follows. So we basically get a ready solution we have the already group of beneficiaries with the amount to be paid, and we do basically just this technical work, getting access to people without internet connection in remote areas and so on. So what concerns the decisions on the groups of beneficiaries, we are not involved into this decision-making process, and I think that that's something that should be changed. Well, maybe someone else was involved, maybe other local organizations were involved, but we weren't. And I think that, well, technical executors should also be involved, because we get some feedback through our channels, feedback from our people we provide assistance to, people who describe their needs. Sometimes they have some questions as to, why they cannot get this assistance. Because there are many people in need, who still can be helped. So I think that that is one of those things we could all work together on, and I think that local organizations should be involved into this decision making concerning the groups of beneficiaries and other important things. Thank you.
Thank you. Marina, Jana, Abby, did any of you want to come in on the sort of this set of issues even?
Paul, I think there's a question that participants would like to know about the trade-off between a very digitalized response and reaching the most vulnerable people who maybe are reluctant to join government lists or who are in areas that are not accessible. So if anyone could speak to the kind of bifurcated nature of this as a very cash-heavy humanitarian response, which I think we all agree is preferable if it can be done, but the areas where cash can't reach and where people can't reach these lists.
Jana, do you want to comment on that maybe?
I think all the more it is important for any local actors, whether even there's not a CSO, but anyone who is sort of connected to the community of the helping community, to be able to discuss with the people there and try to even collect their information and try to help them connect to any of the systems, whether it's the e-Dopomoha or one of our systems. And to Paul, to your or sorry, it was Abby or Paul, I'm not sure, to your question on a trade-off between, fully automatized or one-on-one or more in-person registrations to the system. Still, I think it has to be tailored to the context so that we don't have just a large caseload of self-registered people, which still has to be worked with and deduplicated and checked. But then there has to be found a balance, because if there is no technology, then we know it has been sort of slow to be able to be scaled up. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess, I mean, it's probably a question for Quentin and or Jana, building on that, about the sort of feasibility of cash transfers, the extent to which they're reaching people in areas not controlled by the government and in areas where control has recently shifted. And what do you think, what role do you think cash assistance should play to support people in these areas, and what role should humanitarian actors play in doing that? Quentin or Jana, however you want to say that. Or neither?
Please, Jana.
Thank you. I can share the opinion of our cash advisor on this. So there needs to be a specification between the sort of original NGCA, which was occupied already in 2014, which is ruble-based, and for in regards to the security of this assistance, as the people there could be impacted by being contacted even by us or even by a banking institution which is connected to the government, whether this is even possible. And also there is the control over the telecommunication system, it's even harder to communicate safely with the beneficiaries, even for data collection purposes. For the territories that have been newly occupied, Chersonská, Zaporižská oblast, it seems like there is still a mix of currency where there is still some hryvnia available in the banks, so that there seems to be a higher degree of feasibility, but again, the security issue is there. For example, when we learned about the annexation in, I believe it was beginning of October, we had to really clean our contacts to keep them safe. It was the CSOs, it was the contacts in the communities, because we didn't know what will happen. So I guess these are the two main issues. Of course, access there. I read in one of the reports, and of course, the situation, there is only one crossing. Of course, it's dangerous. We cannot cross. People cannot live there. You need a middleman to bring funding. How would this be done? So we feel that, and we're also advocating this on the senior officials meeting in Brussels, through our management, through our leadership in PIN, that there needs to be a really high level advocacy group formed with UN and member states, for example, to advocate with Russia for access and to be able to provide this assistance in these areas, because of course the people there are really left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Quentin, did you want to add anything to that?
No, thanks.
Great. We've had a few questions in the Q&A about I guess the sort of directness of funding to local organizations, and given the importance of the role that local organizations are playing, why not fund them more generously and directly? Does anyone want to pick up on those sets of questions? Or not? And
I can come in quickly, maybe. Sorry if it's then please someone else. But just from our experience, and I asked my finance colleagues to pull the numbers for 2021. We had partners worth. We were working with implementation partners. The funding worth less than 1 million euros. The total turnover of PIN in 21 was 8 million euros. Donations to the local CSOs was about 225,000 euros. But for example, these donations in 22 was 20-fold larger to 4.4 million euros, and also twice larger the amount of partnerships. We think that it is essential to allow the local CSOs to be allowed at the big table, so to speak. We have created this emergency partnership assessment tool, and we are advocating also for this tool, for this due diligence tool, to be accepted by other NGOs, other INGOs, as well as even some of the UN agencies. We have discussed about issuing a certificate for this, and we know that several organizations that went through this due diligence with us have applied to UHF, for example. We are aware that, of course, the very strict due diligence of the international donors to be able to even apply for the donor is really not doable for many of the CSOs. So increasingly, even in 23, we will be working on being this sort of channel for the funding to even increase further funding for the CSOs, but also listening to them on what they need to be eventually very independent on and to be able to access the larger funding, to be able to get funding for their organizational needs, which we also provide, and also to be able to, if they want to become a humanitarian actor in the coming years, maybe it's not going to be needed, but if they do, on also how can they be accountable, how can they how can they promote safeguarding and humanitarian standards and so on, so that they can really become, at least some of them, a valid local humanitarian actor. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jana. Does anyone else want to come in? Sorry, I'm just catching up on chat. Bear with me for 2 seconds. Oh, we have a question in the chat, so I was confused. Although it's kind of a similar question to what we already asked. It was a question for Alexei and Quentin about the role of NGOs in linking humanitarian assistance to SP social protection under the Parakeet Initiative, and what does the Parakeet Initiative see as the role for national and local NGOs? Quentin, Alexei, do either of you want to sort of add to what you've already said in relation to?
Yes, once again, the Parakeet initiative is now being established, so hopefully we will have soon this technical assistance facility that will be able to engage with all the relevant party and identify the role of each and leveraging. There is for sure in the identification, in the targeting process, local partners have a role there in the feedback and mechanism, being close to the partner, to the beneficiary, they have access. So they have a role. Now we have to include this into that roadmap.
Yep. Great, thank you, Quentin. We're going to wrap up so we can finish sort of as promised at 2:30. I'd like to ask sort of each of the panelists to give me a sort of one sentence sort of final reflection on the single top issue you feel humanitarian actors need to focus on to ensure the best possible cash response for affected people in Ukraine over the next year. Why don't we start, Marina, with sorry, I'm getting my panelists confused. We've lost Konstantin. Alexei, why don't we start with you? One sentence reflection on what you see as the single most important issue for improved humanitarian response.
Найважливішим я вважаю
The most important thing is pace, being fast, and also access to rural areas and people who do not have technologies to be accessed otherwise.
Thank you. Admirably, honestly, one sentence. You don't often get a one sentence reply to a request for one sentence answer. So thank you. Jana, over to you.
It would be the key would be to define our humanitarian issues for the INGOs in light of this discussion. So to find where is our added value in their international humanitarian response, and what can be really handed over to the Ukrainian government.
Great, thank you. Marina, Eva, we lost Konstantin, so we're down a panelist. So do you want to come in with a final reflection based on ground truth's work and the discussion?
Hard to put it in one sentence, but probably yes, in the pursuit of efficiency of digitalization, not to leave those behind who don't feel particularly well versed or who have access problems to those digital technology solutions. So the elderly and those with the disconnect from those technologies due to lack of electricity or internet connectivity. So yeah, some old school approaches are still needed, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Quentin, over to you.
I think we did ground truth solution. Very good information. The presentation, very good information that we did well in this rapid scale up of this humanitarian response. This is good. We can always improve. So let's not be shy of the learning. Let's build, and we can do better.
Great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you hugely to all the participants. As I said in the chat, there's a hugely impressive group of people who've gathered. So huge thanks for making time for this in what I'm sure are very busy schedules. And credit to CALP for their sort of convening power and ability to bring this network together. And huge thanks for bringing this sort of great set of panelists together to give these reflections. I'm sorry we didn't keep the Deputy Minister for all of the chat, but it was very valuable to hear from him about Omega, and also I was very interested in some of the details about the support that sort of has been provided and is being provided to their offices and ways in which they've been supported to scale up the digital response. And I guess a final reflection from me would be, we've heard both about the sort of huge potential of digital platforms and the huge scale that cash assistance has reached, but also, through Ground Truth and for Alexei and Jana, but the importance of sort of solidarity and proximity and being close to people and maintaining that sort of human and face-to-face connection in thinking of that to be provided. And it's finding ways to get those sort of scale and digital potential to be complemented by the sort of face-to-face sort of interaction with people. I think could be important going forward. And all of you are doing that much more directly than I am. So I wish you best of luck with the work, and huge thanks for making time for this reflection for those of us who are less directly involved in the response. Lynn, back to you.
Great. Thanks again. I don't have anything to add, but yes, stay tuned. We'll share the recording and the presentation and all the links to the reports. Some of the CALP reports are still being translated into Ukrainian, but all three will soon be ready. And many thanks to all of you for joining us today. I know our colleagues in Kyiv are experiencing various alarms and sirens, so I know that you were able to drop off, but thank you for joining anyways, and huge thanks for all the efforts. Hope you have a good rest of the day or evening wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks to the translators who were brilliant. I got it all perfectly, so thank you.
Yes, excellent. Thank you to Yulia and Alexandra, as well as to Chris, Veda, and Leonela from the CALP team. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.